Back on, Gordo. Thanks for
So,
doing this, by the way.
yeah. So, so the subtitle, Keep Your Day Job, we kind of touched on that. So, one of the things that many people find, so when you're an amateur athlete, you have this idea that if I could just get rid of everything, my life would be so much better and I would be so much faster and everything would just be great because I could just train all the time and really hit it hard. And there's a chapter of my book with John and Julie that's called The Tired Athlete. And to start that chapter, John tells the story behind this picture. And in this picture, John's totally nuked. And he doesn't look it, but basically he wrecked himself trying to train properly for the Commonwealth Games. And what he came to realize was that the constraints of family, of life, of being a sports doc actually worked for him. And it kept him from overdoing it and it gave him a broader identity. And so, one of the things that I find as an aging athlete is that my constraints, although sometimes I get a little feisty with them, actually work for me. Because for the same reason that John touches on, they keep me from overdoing it. So that's the first thing I kind of wanted to share is that our constraints, our day jobs, the fact that we have all these other things going on in our life can work really well for us. But at JDC, we are fortunate to have all these people around us who are quite serious. And in the background of their lives and in prior lives, they were very serious, such as Coach Julie. So I was sort of like, you know what? Let's think about what we can learn from a professional approach. Now, when I started doing triathlon, there was this concept of the professional age grouper, and it was a derogatory term. So, what it meant was somebody that trained full time and wasn't actually very fast. And it was it's kind of like, he's just a professional age grouper. In other words, people would say, you're good, but the only reason you're good is because you train a lot. And it's kind of like, well, that's kind of how you get good. But a couple of years back, I was listening to Rich Roll podcast, the Bergen Boys, Gustav and Christian. And they were talking about a professional approach. And Christian said something that stuck with me, so I stole it. And he said some of the most professional people in sport are amateurs because they are successful outside of sport and they bring some of these characteristics to their training and their approach to racing. And so that's what I wanted to touch on today. Now, background. Uh, if you can see the pale, hairy guy with narrow shoulders and a rather pear-shaped body, this was me in my early 20s. And
In your prime, Gordo.
well, a certain type of prime, Julie.
Yeah.
Definitely a certain type of prime. But I came from a sedentary background, as the photo demonstrates. I was not an elite athlete or even much of an athlete when I was younger. And then when I started out, a friend of mine, John Newsom, described me as a mediocre age grouper. So I started out pretty average, pretty mediocre. And then from mediocre, I kind of went to zealous. And from zealous, I took the next step to evangelical. And I was just totally into it. And so my background's a little bit unique. I've been coached by four world champions. Not many people have had the breadth of people advising them that I have. And it's been a really neat process to learn from these champions and to try and discover that what drives performance is not necessarily what we think. So particularly on the face of it, Mark Allen and Dave Scott are very different people. But having had my program built by both of them, the program is very similar. And the work that we are all doing is similar. Where it's different is matching the right sessions to the right situation, but also it's sort of how it all comes together, how that relationship comes together. And that's kind of what I want to pull for you today and give you some ideas. Now, Julie talks about something in our cycling chapter um, that I think is really number one, and that I think you should keep at the front of your mind. What do you think it is, Julie?
My armpits just started sweating because I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, we're all friends here. So remember, so I was kind of in the cycling chapter, I make my case that everybody needs a bike. I don't care what your sport is, you need a bike and you need to be riding for the benefits that cycling brings to your body. And John's like, hold on a second. You definitely, there's no proof, and he hasn't seen that cycling makes anybody better. And then Julie comes in and she's kind of like, well, hey, what if you just like to ride? Like the joy factor. So that's the first thing.
That was going to be my guess, the making your heart happy. Julie
There
does
you go.
love to say that.
Yep.
Totally the joy factor. And so I think one of the things that I've noticed with the very best athletes that I've trained with and watched them is when they are training, the joy factor is there. And we can learn from that. Now, obviously, some sessions are going to be tough, and some sessions might even go all the way to brutal, but most of the time, the joy factor is there. Now, part of that is our addiction to exercise and our neurochemistry, but also there's just the enjoyment of maybe being outside and doing the sessions. So, if you lose the joy factor, I believe the clock is ticking. In other words, it'll be difficult to top up the energy. So, how do we get the joy factor back? How do we maintain the joy factor? And these are the questions that I would say you could ask yourself. Number one, when's the last time I laughed out loud? Okay. Who was I with? What was I doing? And just notice these moments. So I'll just give you an example for me. Last time I laughed, I laugh out loud all the time when I'm riding my bike up Flagstaff, outside, riding uphill, surrounded by trees. Nobody sees it. I mean, it's just me, and I'm in a good mood, and I'm laughing, and that's great. So that tells me the final question. What's the source? So if I feel like I'm a bit down, or my energy's low, I can go to these places or these moments or try and recall it in my mind, these situations, and I can kind of top myself up, top my joy up. Even if you are an athlete who races from anger, and there's some very good, very famous athletes, Aaron Baker's one of them, who races from anger and races very well. You still need this joy factor. You need to balance these different aspects of your personality. So understanding your source would be something that I would really recommend. Everything flows from that. Taylor's really good at that. You watch Taylor, and the vibe you get from her is this joy vibe. She's up when she's like with us, with the group. We are a source of energy to her. And Flora's a little more serious, but you can get her to smile sometimes too. All right, team and connection. So, all right, this concept that you hear all the elite athletes, the best athletes, gold medalists. When I listen to a gold medalist talk about their approach, they talk about a team concept. Now, we can bring this to all different levels and all different areas of our life. And it's about building this team around ourselves. And just because we're amateurs or we're not trying to make an Olympic team doesn't mean we can't apply this. So there's different, it's worth thinking through these different relationships and these different roles. Now, I got a name beside everything that you can see in the slide. And these people don't always stay the same over time too. As I mentioned, I've worked with different coaches. I've had different partners, different massage folks, although my main guy's been with me for more than 10 years. DPT is a doctor of physical therapy. If you could find one person close to you, I would recommend you find a physical therapist who has spent over 15 years dealing with running injuries. It's a really valuable person to have on your team. I have a standing appointment with Heather North, and she has enabled me to get something back that I thought I lost for 10 years, and that is the ability to run. And it is just it's an absolute miracle. I thought my running career was over. I just gave up. And with Heather's help, I got it back. And that is a very important role. That pops up a lot. You listen to Taylor talk about her PT. You can listen to Flora talk about the benefit of one good doctor with her injury. And if you get that relationship, it can really be transformational. So that's something to think about. The other thing is, we got some coaches on the call. Um, I coached people that worked in very interesting fields because I wanted them to be part of my team. So I've coached a kidney doc at the Mayo Clinic. I coached a couple orthopedic surgeons. My friend Justin coached a heart surgeon. And with intent, we built up this team and these relationships of very smart people. Now, we're going to be at this whole thing for the rest of our lives. If we do this with intent and nurture those relationships, it can be a really powerful source of knowledge, not just for us, but for the whole team there. So that's sort of something to think about with peers, training partners. And then stroke, bite fit, gait, mechanics, all these types of things. These are sort of like technical specialists. When I was an elite, I worked with Bobby McGee a lot, and he helped me run better. And I've had different bike fit relationships as well to help me get more out of my effort. So these kind of fine details. But ultimately, who's in charge? So that's something to consider. Ultimately, I'm in charge. You're in charge. Having these people on the team does not give me a free pass to stop thinking or to just follow orders. And what I need to be careful about is bringing people on the team that just tell me what I want to hear and using them to support some of my habits that might not be helping me. And this can be difficult. So that guy in the picture, Scott Molina, and he was my head coach for a number of years. And Scott and I share certain personality traits that can get us into trouble. Particularly, we do a lot of volume, and we are comfortable getting very, very tired. And what may have helped me, and by the way, Scott's the reason I got decent. So everything works until it doesn't work. But what may have helped me was having, or when I had these bouts of overtraining, was considering, hey, maybe I should work with somebody that can see these habits that don't work for me. So meaning I want someone with different blind spots. There's no perfect person for a situation. Sometimes you have to change your advisors to help you get around an issue. So John Hellemans, who I write with now, much more conservative with volume, not necessarily more conservative with intensity. He's definitely not shy on doing fast stuff, but because of his medical background, really kept an eye on people to prevent them from overtraining. So that type of relationship may have worked for me. I mean, we'll never really know because you can only live forward. So living forward, one of the great things about Julie is Julie and I think differently about building plans, and we're complementary in that sense. And so it's important to choose people with intent. And sometimes you need a different person to tell you the same message. And that's something. So I've resigned from relationships when I felt like it wasn't getting through. And Melina passed me on. The reason I ended up working with Dave Scott was I'd kind of stopped listening to Scott Molina about certain things. And Scott's like, well, maybe if he goes to Dave, Dave can say the same thing differently and Gordo will actually hear him. And so he passed me off to Dave, and that worked out great. I had a summer training here in Boulder, and I went faster than I ever went before with Dave watching me every day and helping me out. So that's something to think about. Your relationships will change over time, and you are at the center. You're the one thing that's going to be consistent over time. The other thing is mentors versus teachers. So, what I mean by that is anyone you let into your circle, you're going to become like them. You can't help it. You'll pull each other kind of together. So, you need to be aware of that and choose carefully with who you're going to pick, because you want you need to be comfortable with. So there's a lot of great coaches out there, but I don't really want to end up with a life that's similar to theirs. There's I kind of call him, he's the coach that we're not going to name, but he's quite famous for development squads, elite squads, and he's had a little bit of trouble with the law in his home country, um, for sexual assault and stuff. And you could learn from him. So maybe he's a teacher, but you wouldn't necessarily want him to be a mentor, meaning you wouldn't want to get close to that because that whole situation might not play out too well for you. And there's probably a lot of stuff going on under the surface that you might not want to get too close to. So mentors versus teachers. And it's sort of like studying in a book versus joining practical, joining a team. You really want to be careful with the teams that you join. So before we move on, what's missing from this slide? Nothing. Okay. You're probably still thinking in the box of the identity of the athlete. What's missing is life outside of sport, an intimate relationship. You need an intimate relationship, and it's related to this part of source. You need other relationships, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a spouse, but you need close relationships outside of sport to balance your identity as an athlete. It's really, really helpful. When I've had setbacks, bike crashes, injuries, all kinds of stuff, I am always grateful that I have this other parallel lives. There's more than one that I can fall back to, and some diversity. So my whole world doesn't come crashing down when I think I have a stress fracture. Turned out I didn't. Background, in case you were wondering. But it's really helpful. So this comes back to the constraints. These things are constraints when you want to train really hard, but they are a real source of strength when you can't train hard or when things change or whatever. So my family, my wider family, if you're a coach, your athletes, all these different relationships, that gives you something to do when you can't do this small aspect of your life, this athlete aspect. And the high degree of focus stage is temporary for all of us. It comes and goes. So that's something to think about. And one of the things that I say to folks as they get towards the end of their top amateur career or towards the end of their elite career is, you want to kind of start those seeds for what's next. Get that going, because that can be quite helpful. Lower the stakes. All right. This is what I see in terms of athletes. So stability and simplicity. This concept of the basic week. So we set up, elite athletes tend to have this routine that they stay in for some of the year. It gets disrupted with their training and that. What I see missing from most athletes, and it's really what I would bring to people as a coach, would be some form of structured recovery, giving permission to recover. And it can be as simple as I'm sure you've heard Taylor say, Monday and Friday are easy. I just swim and gym. That might be somebody's recovery strategy. Or Hunter Kemper was a really fast guy when I was racing, and he's like, I take Sundays off, and that was it. And it was enough to kind of keep the momentum going for them. But it was a simple rule of thumb that the athlete or you could understand that keeps you from tipping yourself over the edge. I got a couple. So one that works really well for me is 2 back-to-back easy days every week. A new one that Julie recommended, um, following this injury that I had, was, look, you're never going to go more than 3 loading weeks in a row, and you're going to have 5 easy days in a row. So these simple things, and that's 5 days off running. So I don't get into this thinking I have a stress fracture when I don't, because I got so much tendonitis in my leg. The
Hey, Gordo, just on that though, how many hours a week are you looking at while you're talking about these sorts of back-to-back easy days and things?
So an easy day. So yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing is, an easy day is more powerful if you take it before you need it. So that is a really difficult concept for people to understand. You actually have to try it to understand. And the other related to that is, if you think you need one easy day, you should probably take two. Because when you're training at a level where you're too tired, you've got more to gain from resting than you do from getting more tired, if you follow the logic. And so with this easy day, it scales based on the level of athlete you are. So the higher level athlete you are, the higher your chronic training load is going to be. That athlete has more to gain from an easy day than somebody that's training at a much lower level, if you follow what I mean, because they will gain more from absorbing than they will from getting more tired, if you follow that logic. Now, your question is, the other question people always wonder is, well, what is easy? What is an easy day? A simple rule of thumb is take your average weekly hours. So let's say somebody's training 14 hours a week. That's an average of 2 hours a day. So an easy day is going to be half of that. So it's not like you're sitting at home doing nothing, but what you're doing is you're going to de-stress yourself. And I would also think about training in terms of stress rather than in terms of time. And what I mean by that is, for many of us, not training can be a form of stress, if you follow what I'm saying. So like doing nothing can be stressful. And if we get in a situation, which you'll see, if we get in a situation where we can't exercise for 1 or 2 weeks, it's incredibly stressful. And our neurochemistry kind of gets all nuts when we get a little batty. And it's really tough. So the idea is to get this structure to the week, where we can keep our lives balanced and we can just keep it rolling week in, week out. And for the amateur athlete, what I find works really well is an easy day Sunday and an easy day Monday. And why is that? Well, Sunday becomes your family day, and Monday means you start your week off getting whatever the most important thing is in your working life done on that Monday. And those combos mean that your life never really feels like it's getting out of control. So that would be kind of my answer to the question. And then easy's like, for me, easy's like zone one. And it's chill. I mean, it's as easy as it needs to be. And what you'll find if you embrace that approach is that you can get more range. And by range, I mean you can go harder when you need to go harder, and you can do more when you need to do more. And these easy days will let you benefit from those, and you should be seeing progressions. And if you're working hard and you're not progressing, you need to be asking yourself why. What's going on? I mean, when I was training on a much lower level of hours, and I felt like I was going backwards, and so I actually had to dig in a bit and like have a look. Well, turns out I was doing a lot of tempo. I was doing a lot of this in between stuff, and I kind of had to get more split in my approach between my easy and my hard. But I would say the main benefit of taking these proactive easy days, is you're going to lose less time. Because if the only way you ever back off is if you're injured, you're going to be injured quite a bit, because that's the only time you're going to let yourself rest, and your body's going to figure out a way to get you the rest you need one way or another. So you just have to watch that. So I just did it to myself recently. I took myself to the point where I had to stop running, which is, which is a disaster. All right. The other point that I wanted to make on this slide is simplicity in terms of our overall life. And it's not just our training week that is this basic week structure. So when I was coaching, I had my athletes familiar with what the coaching week would look like. In other words, this is how we're going to build the plan. This is how we're going to work together. This is how we're going to interact. And it became known. And I would have them create their slots in the week where we could put workouts in. But we weren't having to start from scratch on everything. And then I ended up with 3 little kids living in the house. And we used the same thing. It's like, let's put a basic week together for the kids. And now the kids' things changed. So we did it seasonally. And it worked really well. We said, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. Here's how the week looks. And we'd run it for like 13 weeks. And the kids, if they wanted to change sports or do something like that, we'd say, well, we got to wait till the end of the season. And then, yeah, then we'll change. So we had this stability and we could keep things in the sort of routine. And that worked great. Another point I want to make for the amateurs out there, you don't need to travel the world like you're trying to get points to qualify for the Olympic team. Travel is very fatiguing. So if the goal is athletic performance, you're going to want to minimize your travel and you're going to want to predominantly race local so that you can focus. Now, when does it make sense to travel? Well, if you're living in Michigan in February, it does make sense to go to Arizona and ride your bike a lot. That would be an example of something that would give you a big boost. It doesn't necessarily make sense to go halfway around the world and do an Olympic distance race. That's not really going to give you what you can do. You can do a trainer session in your basement for that. But getting outside, riding your bike outside, getting in some warm weather, and doing a training camp for a bit makes a lot of sense. So use the travel strategically. Okay. Now, this is a favorite picture. That's Klaus, my training partner, coming out of the water. I'm behind him. So we had just finished swim, bike, and run across the United States. It took us 9 weeks. It was a quest. We thought it was going to be fun. We were totally wrong. It was not fun. it was it was really challenging. But after that 9 weeks, for a period of time, you could not make either of us tired. And so volume works.
Are you
And
guys
always,
still friends?
yeah, well, that was the other thing. He said that actually that day to me. He goes, "Here we are, and we're still friends." It was great. So it was a lot of it was a fun thing to do. So achievable excellence. So this is something that actually is, again, you kind of have to experience it to see it. But most of the people you think you're competing against are going to beat themselves. You don't have to beat them. And it's a strange thing. When you've been around a long time, you'll see it. It gets tougher if you're going to world champs because the people that beat themselves don't get there. So it's easier kind of one level down when you're at this sort of regional level or national level. When you get to this international level and a world level, it's a lot tougher. But Julie's got more experience with that, so maybe that's a talk she can do. But in reality, as an amateur, most of your competition is going to beat themselves. And really, by setting your life up and building these systems that I've been chatting about, you can make it less likely that you'll be the person that beats themselves. You won't beat yourself. You'll turn up and you'll be able to perform. So how are we going to do that as amateurs? Well, if you look at amateurs and you look at how much they need to do, you can be very good if you gain control of all your mornings. Get control of your mornings. You don't need to quit your job. You just need to get control of your mornings. That's going to give you a core level of volume. And in round numbers, you'll get 600 annual hours a year by controlling your mornings. And this is really powerful to have a core allocation of 600 600 hours a year. That is a lot of volume. And if you're primarily a single sport athlete, such as a cyclist or a swimmer, that's a ton of volume to get fit. And then you can use training camps and other things when you want to do little kind of mini overloads. There's a line in there that says mini training camps, 2 or 3 days of overload. You don't need to overload yourself for 2 weeks. You just do 2 or 3 days. You go back to your normal life. And this will give you a core amount of training that is more than just about anybody in your category. And you can have great results from this. And you're just gonna roll it. So it's not a case of kind of going, you're going to think you need to go harder or work more. I would say don't do that. I would say gain control of your mornings. And from there, you'll be able to get consistent loading. And one of the things, for those of you that know my wife, Monica, she's got control of her mornings. So she doesn't do a ton, but she swims most days. And her recovery thing is 1 day off swimming on the weekend and swim on her own on Sunday. And that's enough for her to kind of keep it rolling. And then she just rolls it. And her annual training hours are much less than 600 because she's got other things she wants to do. So that's an important thing to remember. The other thing is don't worry about your protocol. And what I mean by that is there'll be all these different protocols and approaches that float across your consciousness. So should I be doing a VO2 block? Should I do a speed block, this block, whatever the latest thing is? I would say what you want to focus on is consistency. I just am going to train every day. And as long as I can get my training in every day and I don't make any mistakes, I know it's going to work. And this is another thing that's really tough to believe until you've experienced it. If you could just, when I worked with a new athlete and they would come to me, I would say, hey, let's just try and do 13 weeks of sensible training and just see where it gets us. That 13 weeks of base training. And we're not going to travel. We're going to try and simplify the life and we're going to try and see where that takes us. It's a very powerful concept. Consistency is protocol.
It's so simple too, right? When you say it like that.
The challenge is, as a coach, what are you paying me for? You're just giving me the same week over and over again. And you know what I mean? Is you want to kind of try and justify. It's like when you go into the gym for a personal trainer and they just blast the shit out of you for 60 minutes and they're trying to earn their fee. And it's like, no, that's not what it is. You're totally right, Julie. I mean, you just set that week up and we're going to roll the week. And what I'm going to try and do for you is I'm going to try and make the mistakes obvious to both of us. And we can talk about if we want to eliminate them. And then you're pulling stuff away, errors, and you're just going to build on that. If you can do that, you will be generally fit and generally strong. And here's another one. You can get ready for a race in 6 weeks from there. And that has been John Hellemans. I think he's got 10 world amateur titles or something. He won world titles 20 years apart. So when he was 40, he won worlds, and then when he was 60, he won worlds. So it's kind of a unique thing. And in between, he won another eight titles or something. So his approach was just generally fit most of the time. So he never got out of shape. He was generally fit. And then he would have 6 weeks where it's kind of like, okay, I got to open my schedule up. It's not long enough to nuke myself. And I'm just going to get race specific. I'm going to get race ready. I'm going to do the race. And it works. So this is a concept that I've sort of brought. I was like, well, kind of worked for John. It's probably going to work for me. And we used it. Julie and I used it last summer. My program got really hard, but it didn't get really hard for a long time. It was pretty chill. And then we did some really tough, specific sessions to get ready for the Alpe d'Huez Tri, and it worked great. So I'm hoping for a similar result this year with this shorter block, and it fits really well in an amateur's life. So that's what I wanted to kind of pass along there. Try it. You might like what happens. And that's really what I wanted to that's really what I wanted to pass along. So those key points. I'll just sum them up. Keep the joy in the program. If you lose the joy, figure out where it went and go back to where it was and kind of get that back in. The next thing is team. So surround yourself with people that reinforce that joy, people you like hanging out with, and do that with intent with who you're going to work out. I currently have an opening for a training partner. I've been doing a lot of work in my basement. It's something I want to bring back. Um, is that team concept. And then stability and simplicity. Don't make this overly complicated. It's not rocket science. That's what Melina used to tell me. It's just load and adaptation, and you're just going to roll that over time. And then finally, consistency as protocol, this idea of achievable excellence and having focus periods where you lift yourself for a specific goal. And then after that, you recover and you get back to your general preparation.
Awesome. I have a question. I'm going to jump in. It's something that I've seen, obviously, since I've been working with you, and I think I knew this even before we started working together, is just how good you are at going easy when you need to go easy. Is that something that you've always been able to do, or is that something that you've learned just over time?
So, well, I've had a couple phases in my life where I blew it with that. So when I started, one of the things is when I started, I didn't know it, but I had the capacity to do a lot of training. So I didn't realize that. So, it's like this, Steve Magnus calls it blank slate phenomenon. So if all of a sudden an athlete turns up and you're working with somebody that has a lot of potential, no matter what you throw at them, they're going to respond and you're going to look like a hero, like in the first couple years. And so the fact that some of my approaches, I used to do a lot of kind of like circuit type training. CrossFit didn't exist back then, but I would have loved that kind of CrossFit training. And that's not really what you need for triathlon. So I learned over time. And when I started working with Melina, the program, there was so much volume that I had to back off. So I was kind of forced into learning how to back off. But the way I am now with my capacity to be easy, I think part of that is a function of having developed a really good aerobic system over many decades. And so my ability to run with my heart rate at 105, which makes Julie wonder if there's any benefits in me, um, is is that's been developed. So what you see in Training Peaks, my 105 beat run when I was younger, I was probably like 130. I was probably a lot more normal. But what's happened over the years is I think I've had some cardiac remodeling, and I think my overall system's become more efficient. Now, what that means is, though, my issue is similar to some of the smaller females I worked with that weren't really aggressive. And that is, there are times where you got to just buck up and start putting some power to the cranks. And that's kind of why you're on the team, because when I need that workout, I ask for it. And I do better with somebody telling me to do that than opting in. And so that's a really important part of the overall program for me. So, but the other thing is, if you want to learn how to swim, so there's one. So swimming, when we start, it's just a big lactate bath. So I was lucky. I had a really good swim coach who got me to chill out and slow down, and he helped me relax in the water. And then from that ability to relax in the water, which I had no ability to do that, I was then able to get much more efficient at the water. And it's difficult, I think, for Monica doesn't really understand. Monica does not understand how tired I get in the water, how tired a muscular male gets in the water if they do a hard threshold session. It's just a different kind of fatigue. She gets tired, but it's kind of like man flu. It's like man tired.
It's a whole nother level of fatigue.
Well, not really, but it just seems that way if you're a guy. Vanessa
Yes,
got her
we
hand.
have we have some experience with that. I just wanted to Vanessa has a question.
Yes.
Just to pause on that. Yep.
I can wait whoever wants to finish, that's fine. All
Go
right.
for it.
Hi, Gordo. Nice to meet you. I am one of the sneaky people who does follow you on Strava because I find it so fascinating how you apply data to everything. I have two questions. I'll try to keep them short. My first one probably sounds philosophical, but what is the difference between an amateur and a professional, right? Like if an amateur was to just increase the number of hours and be consistent and do everything you've said, like will we one day wake up and be a professional? What what differentiates the two? Is there something to do with natural skills and being gifted in some things? So that's my first question. And the second one is, you're so ingrained in data, which is really fascinating. I'm curious if you have ever felt that your training is perhaps driven more by data and less by just how you feel. And do you feel there's a benefit or disadvantage to either of those?
Okay.
And thanks again for your chat.
So the so a lot of times we used to, when I was racing elite, we would talk about the difference between elite and a professional. And that is, an elite is racing in the elite category. A professional actually has to file a tax return. And that was the difference in terms of that level, right? So are you just fast or are you actually making a living? And that's an important distinction too, because that can impact race selection. Like if I'm trying to make a living here, there would be races where it's like, I'm not going there because it's all just cost. I'm not going to make it. There's going to be nothing in it for me. Now, this difference between amateur and elite, I think, is really personal preference. If you're fast enough to get a pro card, that's up to you. Do you want to get a pro card? Because once you're racing elite, you're not really going to be making much money at the beginning. But there are people that race elite that still have day jobs. I mean, I interviewed, Sophie. She went to the Olympics with a day job, and so it's not necessarily a strict category. Now, the deeper question that I think I kind of heard there is, how do I know? How do I know if I could be an elite? Well, first thing is you'll never find out anything unless you do the work associated with trying to get there. So that's an important thing to remember. And then it comes to that first slide, joy. Do I love doing what's required to improve my performance? Not necessarily to get to an elite, just to get better. If I love it, and I'm going to do it and then I see what happens. Well, how long is it going to take? Everybody I know who was going to get really good, it became obvious after 3 years. So I think that's a good chunk of time. It's like, all right, I'm going to try and be serious about this for 3 years, and if I'm going to get really good, it will become apparent. Now, they weren't great after 3 years. I certainly wasn't great after 3 years, but I saw that I had potential. So in my first 2 years of racing Ironmans, I did 5 Ironmans, and it showed potential. And then I got more serious, and then it took kind of another 3 years. So that's kind of something there. Now, data. Endurance sport is very repetitive, and there is a lot of training that's just the same thing over and over again. So part of the game that I'm playing by checking out my data and looking at all my splits and all this other stuff is I'm taking something that is repetitive and could be boring, and I'm turning it into a game, just like a little video game that is somewhat entertaining for me based on my personality traits and idiosyncrasies. And so the data is really it's just a way to kind of play the game. However, it's also very useful because I have a tendency to get too tired. And if I'm get too tired, it becomes obvious. So by tracking this data, I'm like, oh, I'm in a counterproductive situation now. And it's kind of like, oh, I think I'm starting to go stale. And that's really helpful for me. If you're somebody that has a tendency to make I mean, it's basically just making mistakes, and I can repeat these mistakes. It helps me avoid repeating my errors. So I would say that's the benefit of the data. And also, this whole living in public thing keeps me on the days where maybe I need a nudge to get out there, which isn't all that often, but it is kind of sometimes. It's sort of like, well, if I just take the week off and stay in bed and eat donuts, I mean, it will become obvious to everybody, and that's not really what I want to do. Maybe that's what I feel like doing right now. So it's helpful in that sense. But when you look at what I actually do, the data doesn't determine it. I tend to kind of have an idea, and I'm just doing the data to see what's going on with it.
I would say, like, you definitely are one of the most intentional people that I have worked with pretty much everything that you do in your life.
Yeah.
Following up with that, like you seem to manage your intentionality with your training, with your family life really well. I know a lot of our athletes have really busy lives outside of their training. Can you offer some tips on how best you manage that?
Yeah. When it was really crazy, so it's train, go to sleep when the kids do, train first thing in the morning. That was probably that I made that change when things were really crazy, and it had a dramatic positive impact on my life. So go to sleep when the kids do, train first thing. And now we kept our kids active, so they needed more sleep than us. That's another trick, because it doesn't work. It definitely doesn't work if your kids sleep less than you, right? Because they're going to be awake before you, and then you're screwed because you're not going to be able to get your workout, at least until they get older. But there is this period when they're little where it's kind of like damage control, and that was a change that I made that worked really well for me. And it was and it was one session a day. So that first session was the most important one, and if anything happened later, that would be like a bonus session. And whenever I got a window, whenever I got a window, I would try and do something longer. And so bike's the easiest thing. So if all of a sudden something opened up in my schedule, I'd go for a ride. And it was just a simple thing. So every morning it was strength or cardio, go to sleep when the kids do, get a bonus window, go for a ride. And it was just a very simple structure that got me through this period of my life where it was extremely busy. The other thing, having worked with CEOs, on-call doctors, people running their own businesses, is that you need to understand that your life falls apart with 10% too much. So this is a strange one. If it's somebody that has a flexible schedule, they don't necessarily understand. But as a working athlete, if you just have 10% too much in your week, all of a sudden everything starts unraveling on you. So what we would try to do, Melina calls it the 90% plan, is you aim for 90% of what you think you can do, and it'll get you almost all the fitness. If you go for that 100% plan, there's almost a 100% chance you're going to fall apart. So you have to aim a little under, because you have to build this cushion in, because you have all these other things going on in your life that you're going to need to allow for. And my personality is I get so depressed if I miss a workout or I feel like I'm not measuring up to the plan. So I need flexibility in the plan for me to overperform. So Julie, when she looks at training peaks, I'm always like moving things around and things like that. And, it can be frustrating to a certain type of coach, but I'm sort of like, hey, I'm in this phase. I need to know the key workouts. I'm going to get them done. And I need to, and that's what matters. And then we're going to need flexibility on the kind of other stuff. And then if it's a training camp, I'm like, okay, now I can do kind of whatever you think. Let me know what you think the key things are to get done. And then I have the flexibility. So being older, I need a lot of flexibility, because I'll wake up some mornings and be tired. And if I have a big day on, that's just not going to happen. So I need to build in a lot more flexibility than I needed when I was younger, and I bounce back quicker.
Awesome, thank you. Hugo, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Hey, Gordo, Hugo
Hey.
Pochel, thanks for the talk. So um, I um, I spent quite a bit of time traveling, so I probably travel an average of a week a month. Um, and unfortunately, places I travel to don't always have access to gyms or unable to really go run outside for security reasons. And so, thoughts on how do I keep that cadence? When I do have that break, that forced break, probably about every 3 weeks.
Okay. So when I lived in Hong Kong and I was early in my career, uh, 50% of my nights were not in my own bed.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been there. I've had a job where I had to travel. And it wasn't all traveling down to Melbourne, Australia. It was travel like to India, China, and places where training could be really tough. Like you said, there's just no ability to train outside. So, one of the things, if you can, something that really helped me was to choose where I stayed so that I could get something done. So, to try and find, like, just even if it's just a little like exercise bike or something and to build, are you traveling to the same place or is it different places all the time?
I travel different places, primarily Latin America.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's going to be a challenge because you kind of have to relearn every place when you go there. So to the extent that you can stay somewhere where there's even a little hotel gym, that's great. The other thing is you're probably going to need to get some sort of 20-minute routine that you can do in your hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this routine. So I coached a doc and he had a lot of travel. And what he did was he got himself a 20-minute routine that he could do every morning when he was traveling, when he woke up, and he would just do the same routine. And then it put his mind at ease. So his job when he was traveling was actually the job, whatever it was. But for him to feel like he wasn't going backwards, 20-minute routine. And I would say that's going to be the easiest way, particularly for some of these places sounds like you're going where it's just not going to happen in terms of some sort of conventional thing. You just have to come up and that's going to be like probably some exercise bands or something like that. It could be as simple as, I mean, it would be for him. Sometimes it was like, this day is going to be crazy. I'm just going to bang out 20 push-ups and just not take a zero. And it would be just something, this routine that he would have that he could do in the hotel room. And then he'd just go on and work with it.
Good thought. Thanks.
Another thing, if you're traveling somewhere interesting and there's something nearby that is safe and outside that you can do, I would tack on days then. So that's worth thinking about. And if I ever traveled somewhere that was good for riding, I would actually bring my bike with me. And my friend Justin coaches a FedEx pilot, and he's got a bike that actually fits in a proper suitcase. So he's not traveling with it's one of these Bike Friday things. And so he's not traveling with a giant bike case. And so he's got the ability to ride anywhere he goes if the opportunity presents itself. And that's also something to think about. I had one for a while. If you do, just be careful. The little wheels handle a little differently.
Yeah.
I crashed mine in Stanley Park in Vancouver one time. So
No
Thanks.
bueno.
yeah.
Cordo, I have a quick question. You talk about fatigue and added stress in your life, be it from age or travel or family stress. How are you monitoring fatigue? Is it what metrics are you tracking to monitor fatigue?
Okay. So the best fatigue metric is my patience. So if I'm impatient, that's a sign that I'm too tired. I hate admitting this, like, because it's sort of like, oh, I can handle it. I can keep training. But that is
Sorry.
probably, so my kids are pretty good at pointing it out to me because I think they've been secretly trained by Monica to point out when dad's a little too tired because I do listen to them. It's like, don't be mean to me, dad. You need to be more patient. So that's a good one. Now, in terms of data and things that things where it shows up, I take my heart rate every morning, HRV for training, and just a short sample. It's like a 1 minute sample. I can see my HRV. And if it's low, my HRV is low and my resting heart rate is elevated, I'll take another reading. And sometimes I'll take even three because I don't like being told I have to rest, even if it's by a heart rate sample. But if it's suppressed and my heart rate's up, and especially if it's been down for a couple of days, I'm like, okay, I'm too tired. Now, this information, you need to have a healthy baseline to go on. So a couple times a year, I'll do what's called a fatigue washout, and I'll just kind of shed all the fatigue and I'll see, well, how low does my resting heart rate go when I'm rested? And so I know when I'm tired and it's starting to creep up, I can actually see it. Because when I came back to structured training, I didn't realize it at the time, but I had chronic fatigue. And I was run down, I was impatient, my life was pretty dark, and I didn't know how tired I was. So it wasn't until I started actually looking at the data and I was like, oh, actually, I've been carrying all this fatigue around. And then as that fatigue clears off, my mood improved, things were a lot better. Mark Allen said an interesting thing about fatigue. He said, chronic fatigue is like an onion. You're going to peel a layer off and you're going to feel better, but you're still tired. So you got to peel another layer off and get better. And you kind of have to go through these. And just because you're feeling better, you might be on the upswing. It might not necessarily mean you're fully better yet. And that's when he was coaching me through a kind of a little bit of an overtraining bout. Not really overtraining, overreaching bout that I had. And I was talking to him on the phone. It's like, hey, man, I can't figure out why I'm so tired. And it's like, well, you don't really need to know why. You just need to know that you are a little too tired. You've recognized that. Now it's time to kind of shed that fatigue. And he kind of chatted me through that. So that would be a big one in terms of something that you could see. Another thing, one of the things I'll see, you all know I do a lot of lactate testing. I lose my top end. So when I did a workout, if those of you that follow me, you may have noticed that I did a workout where my lactate got over 10 this week. My ability to get my lactate up is a sign I'm not tired. When I get tired, my lactate won't elevate. Why doesn't matter. I just know that I have this signal that I can't hit my max heart rate and I can't hit my max lactate. And that's a sign that I'm really tired. So before I do a zone 5 block or a really hard block of training, I will check in and say, hey, do I have that ability? So it's usually a testing kind of workout, some sort of incremental test or a ramp test, and see how high I get. And if it's all looking normal, I know I'm good to go. But when I'm too tired, that kind of turns up. And then there's another flip side to fatigue. So that is kind of like if you like a too tired, but there's another type of fatigue, which is too amped. So now I'm green light. I got the green light for doing a bunch of hard training. If I do too much hard training, I get chronically overstimulated, which is a form of fatigue, but it's not a sit on the couch all day. It's kind of like I can't sleep fatigue. And so that's another marker for me. I can't fall asleep because my body's too amped. And that's a sign I got to really slow it down and just slow myself down with this overstimulation. And that's part of that with getting older is why I stopped drinking coffee, because I used to drink a ton of coffee, and that I was concerned that maybe that was overstimulating me, but also I would miss that fatigue because I would just keep pounding coffee. And then eventually, if anybody that's done it, you know that you will get to the point where coffee doesn't work. In other words, you will drink coffee and you will have no response from the caffeine, and then you know you definitely need to rest.
Kids are back from swimming.
Yeah, they're coming in.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, Gordo. I always love listening to what you have to say, even if we do think differently about some things. If people want to listen to you more or read about the things you have to say, can you remind them of where they can find you?
I am everywhere.
Why? Yes.
Strava, Instagram story. I'm not very good at the whole Instagram thing. I have no riz, but I put stuff up in my story. I'm on X, And if you want to see how I apply it, you can look at Strava. Everything I do goes up on Strava. And I'm like super friendly. So if you have more questions, just hit me up. My DMs are open on X as well as Instagram, and I answer them all, unless you're trying to sell me Bitcoin or something.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gordo.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Gordo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
See you
Gordo.
soon.